Bienvenue mes amis, Cajun Coding. This is Saint Raz again, and we are continuing on our Java journey through the Array2 series of exercises, picking up with has 12 or has 1-2. I'm still nursing a little bit of a cold, but I'm pretty sure my voice will hold out. Let's see if my brain holds out well enough to get through these. And we'll just take it one step at a time here. So for this exercise, given an array of ints, return true if there is a 1 in the array with a 2 somewhere later in the array. So let me see. And it's kind of odd. All three of their examples resolve to true. But we'll go ahead and get started on this. I'm going to go ahead and set up a Boolean. And I do not have focus. Here we go. Put Boolean 1, and we'll set that initially to false. And my keyboard's making a lot of noise. I can fix that. Hold on one. And then we're going to name that Boolean 1. That's going to indicate that we've already found our 1. And we're going to set up our for loop to iterate through the array. I wonder how many times we're going to create a loop that looks exactly like that through the course of these exercises. Of course, the body of the loop won't be the same every time, but let me see. So if nums I is equal to 1, then we're going to toggle that Boolean variable. We're going to make it true. And also within the body, this is not an else, this is another if. If 1 is already true, and since it's a Boolean, we can just put 1, and nums I is equal to 2, we return true. And if we iterate through the entire array and do not find that condition, we return false as a default. And that's it. Now notice here we've got 1. This is our Boolean false. That's going to remain false. So this statement is not going to return true until we've already encountered that 1 and flipped that Boolean named 1 to true. So, pretty simple. And we're on to the next exercise here. We've got mod 3. Given an array of ints, return true if the array contains either 3 even or 3 odd values all next to each other. So I'm not sure if we're going to run into any edge cases where we have a very short array, but we can work through that. So only if num's length is greater than 2. So we're going to have at least 3, and we're going to put a lot of our code inside that if. Let me see. So it's either 3 even or 3 odd all next to each other. So what we can do, we're going to go ahead and start it at 2, which is the third, being 0 index is the third element in the array. And this is going to prevent us overrunning the end of the array. And of course we're going to increment 1 element at a time. And now here's the meat of it. If nums I, and we're going to use the modulo 2. Now any two nums, any x, any number, okay, x modulo 2, if x modulo 2 equals 0, that's an even number. You divide it by 2, if there's no remainder, that's an even number. Any non-zero value, which of course is only going to be 1 in the case of integers, since they are by definition whole numbers. Okay, so x modulo 2 can be either 1 or 0 only, and if it's a 0 it's even, if it's a 1 it's odd. So now we don't actually have to tell whether it's even or odd, only if they match the other integers from the other addresses that we're comparing it to. So nums I modulo 2 equals nums I minus 1 modulo 2. Did I say modulo 0? Anyway, and then also nums I modulo 2 equals nums I minus 2 modulo 2. And if that is the case, that satisfies the conditions, and we return true. And as we iterate through the entire array, if we do not find that condition, then we return false by default. This conditional makes things pretty neat and clean, because if we have 2 or fewer indexes in elements in the array, if the array is too short, then obviously it can't have 3 matching values. We skip over all this logic and go straight to the return false, like so. Now we could certainly complicate this a little bit. In a way it complicates it, in a way it simplifies it. You'll find the case, it's often the case for a novice programmer that they'll make things, well, we could check the values in each of these 3 places and assign, we could just assign a Boolean, okay, true if it's even, false if it's not, or we could set up a variable for each one of those 3 spots and then test each variable modulo 2 to see if they come up with the same thing. It might be a little bit easier to follow, but it gets complicated, and really, just modulo 2 equals modulo 2 here, and then again with the current in the index to 2 places to the left, it gets the same thing. So a lot of getting better at programming is learning how to be succinct in what you say. Okay, and on to the next one. We have 3. Given an array of ints, return true if the value 3 appears in the array exactly 3 times and no 3's are next to each other. So we need exactly 3 3's, and we need to make sure they're not adjacent. So if nums length is greater than, has to be greater than 4. The shortest we could possibly have, see if you see their first example, we have to have at least 3, and then we have to have at least 2 more to separate those 3's. That's the shortest string that we can have that can come out to be true. I shouldn't say string. Shortest string of characters. It's actually the shortest length of an array, in this case of integers. So it's got to be greater than 4. So we'll go ahead and put a lot of our logic in there. If we, let me see, if it's not greater than 4, then it would be false. So we'll go ahead and put a false there. Okay. And let's go ahead and get a count of how many of those 3's we have. We'll just call it count. And then our for loop. Okay, and if nums I is equal to 3, then we will increment count like so. Okay, and if count is equal to 3, and if, I don't have to put an if there. This is inside the if statement. So, and, see, nums, let me see, let's do, I was going to do a last index and a first index, but that won't work. There is no index of method for, you see, there's no index of method for arrays in Java. So I had forgotten that until I started to type it. So let's do int first index. So that'll be our first index, and then we'll do last index. So we're going to have to do this manually, so to speak. Okay, so we're going through. Okay, so if we find the 3, then we're going to increment the count. We're going to do that every time. If let's do it like this. Okay, and I'll explain that in a moment. Okay, so if nums I equals 3 and first index is equal to -1, then we're going to do first index is going to change to I. And we don't actually need another if here. We're just going to add this in here. And I'm going to clean up the spacing here because this is going to look pretty rough. And we'll go ahead and put this in here. Last index is going to be set to I. Okay, and what we're doing here, so we find a 3, then we're going to increment count. We're going to count that 3. Okay. We're also going to set last index to I. That would be the current index that we're iterating through. Okay. Now if nums I equals 3 and first index equals -1, which is what we set it to initially, then first index is going to be I, which is the current index. Now as we iterate through the array, we might find more 3's, which is going to update last index. And when we finish going through the array, last index will of course be the last index that had a 3, which is exactly what we want that to represent. However, after we find the first index, then the value of first index will no longer be -1, so it's not going to change. It's only going to be changed the one time, no matter how long this for loop is. Why -1? We could have done 0. We use 0 a lot. Well, if we use 0, that's actually a valid, if we don't find a 3 at all, then it would still be 0, which is actually inaccurate. But more importantly, -1 is not a valid address of an array at all. So it's, we don't have to worry about that giving us like a false positive or anything like that. In fact, there are some methods that will return a -1 or will accept a -1 as meaning that something wasn't found that we were searching for the location of. So something for which we were searching the location. That way I'm not ending in a preposition. Okay. Not that grammar rules are largely arbitrary or anything, but okay, back to the problem here. Where are we? So if count is equal to 3, no more no less, and let me see, nums first index plus 1 is not equal to 3, and nums last index minus 1 is not equal to 3. Return true. Not sure about this parentheses. Let me see. It looks like it's right. Missing return statement 19. Don't think I might not need that else. There we go. Didn't really need the else. This return statement is in, the main body of the method, of the function. So, yeah, there we go. Yeah, just a thing to remember, index of and last index of, really handy, nice to have. I totally would have used that directly in the case of a string, but those are not built in for arrays in Java. In this iteration of Java, I don't know, they might have, the last iteration came through, last version might have it, but not currently. So on to the next one, and we have Array2 2. Given an array of ints, return true if every 2 that appears in the array is next to another 2. So this is another example of where we're going to be iterating through the array, and we're going to be comparing adjacent values. So let me see. So int, let me see. I'm going to look for our edge cases here. We're going to have a really short array. So let me see. So if nums length equals 0, well, if it equals, let me see if it was 0. Yeah, let's just do that. If it equals 0, I think they're going to want us to return true. I'm not positive there. Now if nums length equals 1 and num0 equals 2, return false. And then else turn true. Well, I don't know, that's kind of getting into the weeds there, because if I do that, that's going to return false. that's going to return false. So let's just go ahead with that right now. We'll see. I'm not sure whether they're going to how they're going to treat these very short arrays, but I'm pretty sure that's going to be correct. So we'll go on to our 4. We'll see if we have any weird edge cases after we run it. So nums length. Okay, now we have a couple of cases here. If I is equal to 0, we'll deal with that. And then if I is equal to nums length minus 1, which would be the last position in the array. And then we have our normal case where we're somewhere in the middle. Okay. And we're going to look for, this says every 2 is next to another 2. So we're going to look for those cases that break that and make it false. So if I equals 0, that's the first element of the array. If nums I is equal to 2 and nums I plus 1, which is the very next one, is not equal to 2, then we return false. We're looking at the last one in the array. If nums length minus 1 is equal to 2 and nums length minus 2, which would be the next to last, is not equal to 2, then we return false. And everywhere in the middle, if nums I equals 2 and nums I minus 1 is not equal to 2 and nums I plus 1 is not equal to 2. Now, next to another 2, either one of those could be correct. Either one of them could be a 2 before or after. So we need to make sure they're both not a 2. So we need to enclose them like this. So if this is a 2 and neither of these are 2's, then we would return false. And I think our default would be to return true because we haven't found an exception to that. Well, looks like we're pretty consistent. We got a lot of them out of. Oh, this is 2. Must have messed something up somewhere because that's a lot of falses. So if length equals 0, return true. Do we have an empty one? Okay. If length equals 1 and it contains a 2, return false. Okay, so those are actually correct. If its length equals 1 and it's length equals 1 and it's not a 2, it would return true. Let's go ahead and swap this, and we're going to return true because we're going to by default return. By default we should be returning true, and then we're looking for. That's why we have so many that are incorrect. By default we're returning true, and we return false immediately if we find an exception to that. Now we do have some out of bounds stuff, but so I think that improved it a little bit. Out of bounds exception minus 1. if nums equals 1. And this is in the main flow. So this is going to execute regardless of whether that executes or not. And I think I see what we're doing here. Actually, I forgot to do something here. Notice this if, and this if. These are kind of at the same level in code. Okay, these are going to execute first, and then this one executes. But this is not nested in any of these, and this is not an else. So if one of these executes, it doesn't prevent this one from executing. So if I equals 0, we totally want to execute this line. Okay. But if I equals 0 and then this expression returns true, if this expression highlighted here is true, then it returns false. But if this resolves to false, then it ends that if, and then it ends this if, and then it executes this. And we don't, if we run through this code, we don't want to execute this code. If we end up executing this if statement, we don't want to execute this one. So we're going to use one of our keywords that I think we introduced a few exercises ago, and we're going to put a continue here, and we're going to put continue here. Forgetting to do that, I think, caused the problem. So there we go. Well, that fixed most of that stuff. Now we have 1, see 2 equals false. I thought we had the 1. See if length equals 1 and it does not contain a 2, return false. That's length 1. It does return, it does contain a 2, so we're supposed to return false. Oh, you know what? If it's length 1, shouldn't it return false all the time? Yeah, it should return false all the time. Because if it does contain a 2, it's a 2 and it's not next to another 2. And if it doesn't contain a 2, oh no, that's the other one. Okay, so if its length equals 1, return nums 0 equals 2, or actually return the opposite. Return does not equal 2. That'll do it. Okay, that was kind of weird. We could have an array that's 1 in length. If it's 1 in length, then if it contains a 2, then we're supposed to return false, because that's a 2 that's not next to another 2. If it doesn't contain a 2, then it returns true, because it's not breaking our rule. All the 2's that are there have to be next to another 2. But if we don't have any 2's, we're not breaking that rule. So if it's length 1, then we return num0 does not equal 2, and that way it'll catch it either way. Where are they? Right there. So that one had a few twists and turns. That's okay. Good practice. And on to SameEnds. Return true if the group of n numbers at the start and end of the array are the same, for example, with 5, 6, 45, 99, 13, 5, 6. The ends are the same for n equals 0 and n equals 2, and false for n1 and n3. Oh, okay, I see what they're saying here. So if you take just the very end, 5 does not equal to 6. But if you take a byte of 2, 5, 6 equals 5, 6. If you take a byte of 3, 45 does not equal 13, or 13 does not equal 5. So let me see what we've got here. So let me see. Okay, int I equals, we're going to start at 0 because we are going to be looking at the first elements of the array. And then I is going to be less than, and I think it's going to be length here, or len. That's our second variable that we receive in, the integer, and then I plus plus. So let's look for, I'm not sure. Yeah, let's look for an exception. We'll return true by default, and let's see if we find an exception. So if nums I, which is our iterator, is not equal to nums, and this is going to be nums length minus the length variable we got plus I. So as we go through, let's say we take a 2, we're going to start here, or I was going to start at 0 there, but over here we're going to start at the end, but if length is minus 2, we're going to bump it back a couple spots. I'm going to need a plus 1. No, I shouldn't need a plus 1, because if we go with length, it's actually starting after. Minus 1 would be our last element, but we're starting here. So if we start with 1, that would put us at the very end. So this should be fine here. And then if it's not equal, we found our exception, and we'll return false. And then outside of that logic, we return true as our default. And there it goes. This one's not very intuitive. We do nums length minus the len variable because we're not going from the outside in. From both ends, we're starting here, but we're then starting some spaces in. And then we're still reading from left to right at this end, just as we're reading left to right from this end, rather than from right to left. Okay, and I think we're at like about 34 minutes here, so we're going to pick up with triple up for the next series of exercises. As always, thanks again for tuning in. Like, subscribe, recommend. Any questions, comments, requests are appreciated, and I'll see you guys next time.